The last thing my sister ever said to me was that she was sorry. Not sorry for the 2 years of lying. Not sorry for the doctor's appointments she faked, the wigs she bought, the prescription bottles she left on my kitchen counter. So I would see them and feel guilty for every moment I wasn't being there for her. Not sorry for what she did to my children. She was sorry because it didn't work out the way she planned. That was her apology. And I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not a bitter woman. I am not someone who holds grudges or looks for reasons to feel wronged. I was, for most of my life, the kind of person who believed that family meant something. That the people who shared your blood, your childhood, your memories, those people were safe. I believed that with everything I had. And that belief almost cost me everything. My house. My savings. My marriage. My children's stability. My sanity. All of it. Nearly gone. Because of one woman. My sister. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I was 34 years old when this began, and I had spent the previous decade building something I was genuinely proud of. A life that didn't come easily. A life I earned. My husband Daniel and I had met in our mid-20s at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. He was quiet at first. Thoughtful in a way that felt rare. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers, and by the end of that night, I knew something had shifted inside me. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. We got married in a small ceremony in the backyard of his parents' home in September, with 30 people we actually cared about and fairy lights strung between the oak trees, and my sister Lena standing right beside me as my maid of honor. She cried during my vows. I remember looking at her while Daniel spoke and thinking, this is what it's supposed to feel like. This is what a real family looks like. 3 years after the wedding, our daughter Mia was born. 14 months later, our son Caleb. I won't lie, those early years were hard. 2 Bobbies under 2, a mortgage, Daniel's long hours at work. My own part-time job that I clung to because I needed something. That was mine. But we made it work. We always made it work. And through all of it, the sleepless nights, the tight budgets, the arguments that left us, both exhausted on opposite sides of the bed, Lena was there. She would show up on a Tuesday with dinner. She'd take the kids for a Saturday afternoon so Daniel and I could breathe. She was my sounding board, my emergency contact, the person I called before I even called my mother. She was my best friend, wearing the title of sister. I need you to understand that so you understand what came next. Because none of what happened makes sense unless you understand how much I loved her. How completely, and without reservation, I trusted her. Lena was 2 years younger than me. Growing up, we were close in the way that sisters who share a room are close, which means we knew each other's worst habits. And loved each other anyway. She was funnier than me. Louder. More comfortable in a room full of strangers. Where I'd find a corner to stand in at a party, Lena would find the center of it. People were drawn to her. She had this way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person she'd ever met, and when her attention was on you, it felt like standing in warm light. I used to joke that I got the ambition, and she got the charm. We both laughed at that. She laughed louder. Lena had dated on and off through her 20s, but nothing had ever really stuck. She'd have a relationship for 8 or 9 months. Something would go wrong, usually something she'd describe as him not being ready or the timing being off, and she'd come back. to me, and we'd eat takeout on my couch and talk until midnight. I never thought anything of it. At 32, she was still figuring it out. Plenty of people are. But there is one memory that I keep returning to now. One moment I've turned over in my mind so many times it's worn. Smooth like a stone in a river. It was about 8 months before any of this started. Daniel and I had just closed on our second property, a small investment house we'd saved for years to buy. We were celebrating at dinner, just the two of us, and I had called Lena beforehand to tell her the news. She was excited. She said all the right things. But when she walked through the door that evening, she'd come by to drop off a housewarming card, something crossed her face when she looked at Daniel. Something quick and there and gone, like a shadow behind glass. I didn't name it at the time. I didn't even really register it consciously. It was just one of those things your body notices before your brain catches up. I filed it away without meaning to. And I forgot about it completely. Until I needed to remember it. About a year after that dinner, Lena started changing. It was subtle at first. Small things. She'd cancel plans at the last minute with vague explanations. She seemed tired, in a way that felt different from normal tired. She lost a little weight, which I noticed but didn't say anything about because Lena had always been self-conscious about her body, and I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. I asked her once, casually, if everything was okay. She smiled and said she was fine. She said she'd been stressed at work. I believed her. A few weeks later, she asked if she could speak to Daniel alone about something financial. She said she trusted him with numbers more than anyone she knew, and she needed advice about some accounts she was consolidating. I thought nothing of it. Daniel was good with money. People asked him for advice all the time. He came to me afterward and said she was sorting out some old savings accounts. Nothing unusual. I moved on. But here is the thing I only understood much later. That conversation, that quiet, ordinary 10-minute conversation in my kitchen while I was putting the kids to bed was not about savings accounts. It was the first move. And I didn't see it. I want you to hold on to that. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to make that moment feel very different by the time we reach the end. 3 weeks after that conversation, Lena called me at 7 in the morning. I remember the time exactly because Mia had just gotten up and was pulling at my sleeve asking for cereal, and I was half awake, reaching for the phone on instinct. Her voice was different. Flat in a way I'd never heard before. She said, "I need to tell you something and I need you to stay calm." I sat down on the kitchen floor right there. Mia looked at me like I'd done something strange. Lena told me she'd found a lump. She told me she'd been to 2 doctors already without saying anything to anyone because she hadn't wanted to worry us until she knew more. She told me the second doctor had confirmed what the first one suspected. Breast cancer. Stage 3. The room went quiet in a way that rooms go quiet when something inside you breaks. I don't remember exactly what I said. I remember crying. I remember Daniel coming in and taking the phone from me and talking to her in the careful, steady voice he uses when he's trying to hold a situation together. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor with Mia in my lap, her small hand patting my face because she didn't understand what was happening, but she knew something was wrong with me. I remember thinking, not Lena. Not hers. Not my person. And just like that, everything changed. Our whole family, rearranged itself around her diagnosis. That is what love does. That is what we do for the people we believe in. And that is exactly what she counted on. In the weeks that followed her diagnosis, our family mobilized around Lena in the way families do when someone they love is sick. My mother flew in from out of state. My aunt started a meal train. I rearranged my work schedule to drive Lena to her appointments twice a week. She told us she was starting chemotherapy. She described the treatment in detail, the cold cap she was using to try to keep her hair, the anti-nausea medication that made her exhausted, the port they'd supposedly installed in her chest to make the infusions easier. She knew every word. She had every answer. And she looked tired enough that I never once doubted her. Looking back, I think about how easy it is to perform exhaustion when you're also performing grief. Because Lena was grieving something. Just not what we thought. The first month, I gave her money to cover her copays. The insurance wasn't covering everything, she said, and she hadn't planned for this, and she was too proud to ask but too scared not to. I handed it over without hesitation. Whatever she needed. She was my sister. She was sick. I would have given her anything. And I think she knew that. I think she had always known that. About 3 months in, something small happened that I didn't think about until much later. Daniel came home from work one evening and mentioned that he'd stopped by Lena's apartment to drop off some groceries. I hadn't asked him to. He said he was in the area. I remember thinking it was sweet. Thoughtful. He'd always been close to Lena. Family is family. A week later, my mother mentioned that Lena had been looking better lately. More energy, she said, almost like she's turning a corner. I felt relief pour through me like warm water. I texted Daniel that night and told him what Mom had said. He responded with a single heart emoji. Nothing unusual. But I noticed, in the weeks that followed, that he mentioned Lena's name more than he used to. Small references. Lena said something interesting today. Lena recommended this podcast. Lena asked how you were doing, you should call her. I noted it. I didn't name it. I filed it away. Alongside that shadow on his face at dinner. Alongside the conversation about savings accounts. The file was getting heavier. I just wasn't ready to open it yet. Then I found the text messages. I want to be precise about this because I've told this part of the story many times, and I always want to be honest about how it happened. I was not snooping. I was not suspicious. Not yet. Daniel had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, and it had lit up with a notification. Not a message, just an app alert, and I had glanced at the screen out of pure reflex. The name at the top of his messages was Lena's. That wasn't unusual. She messaged us both regularly. But the timestamp was unusual. The most recent message had been sent at 2:47 in the morning. I stood there for a moment. I told myself there was a rational explanation. She was sick. Sick people have bad nights. Sick people reach out when they can't sleep. But something in my body had already decided. I picked up the phone. I didn't read far. I didn't need to. The first message I saw from Daniel said, I know, me too. We just have to be careful a little longer. 4 seconds of reading. That's all it took. 4 seconds, and the entire architecture of my life began to crack at the foundation. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. I went into the bathroom and turned on the cold tap and held my wrists under the water until my hands stopped shaking. I looked at myself in the mirror and I made a decision. I was not going to react. Not yet. I needed to know everything before I said a single word. That night at dinner, I watched Daniel's face while he talked about his day, and I looked for any trace of guilt, any flicker of discomfort. There was nothing. He was relaxed. He poured himself a glass of wine and told me a funny story about a meeting that had gone wrong and helped Caleb with his homework and kissed me on the cheek before we went to sleep. I lay in the dark next to him, and I understood for the first time what it feels like to be completely alone in a room with someone you've shared your life with for 10 years. Over the next 2 weeks, I started paying attention to everything. Not desperately. Not frantically. Carefully. The way you approach a fire when you're not sure how big it is. I noticed Daniel was taking more late calls from work. I noticed Lena had stopped asking me to drive her to appointments. She was using an app for rides now. I noticed that when the three of us were together, she would touch my arm a lot. Sympathetically. Like she was comforting me. Like she already knew something I didn't. And I noticed, most damningly, that she no longer talked about being sick. She talked around it. She referenced it. But she had stopped describing symptoms the way she used to. The flood of medical details that had characterized her first months of treatment had slowed to a trickle. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was under stress. I told myself that sick people have good weeks. But I had already made the call. I had already left a voicemail for a private investigator I'd found through a colleague who'd been through a divorce. I hadn't told anyone. Not my mother. Not a friend. No one. Because I needed to be sure before I burned everything down. And I needed to be sure because part of me, the part that had known Lena my entire life, was still hoping I was wrong. I'm going to be honest with you. I was not wrong. I was not even close to wrong. The investigator's name was Marcus. He was in his 50s, quiet-spoken, and had the kind of careful, unreadable face that told you he had seen most things and been surprised by very few of them. He met me at a coffee shop 3 blocks from my office. I told him what I suspected. I told him I needed surveillance and I needed to know everything there was to know about my sister's treatment. He told me he could have preliminary findings within 10 days. It took him 6. He called me on a Thursday morning while I was in my car, in the parking lot of my children's school. He said, "I think you already know the first part of what I'm going to tell you." I told him to say it anyway. He said Daniel and Lena had been meeting privately. Not at her apartment. At a hotel 20 minutes outside the city. He had photographs. The world outside my windshield continued exactly as it always had. A woman walked past with a stroller. 2 kids in backpacks chased each other through the gate. The sun was doing what it always did at that time of morning. And I sat perfectly still in my car and waited for the rest of it. Because Marcus had said the first part, which meant there was a second part. Marcus met me again 2 days later with a full report. He handed me a folder and gave me a few minutes to read before he said anything else. I remember staring at the first page. Then the second. Then I turned back to the first page because my brain couldn't process the sequence. My sister did not have cancer. She had never had cancer. Marcus had pulled her medical records, legally, through channels I won't go into, and there was no oncologist on record, no diagnosis, no treatment plan, no chemotherapy sessions, no port installation. Nothing. In 14 months of claiming to be dying of stage 3 breast cancer, Lena had not visited a single oncology clinic. The doctor's appointments, I had driven her to twice a week for months. I had dropped her at the front entrance of a medical building she had scouted specifically because it looked like the kind of place where you could receive chemotherapy. She had walked through the front door and walked out the back. She had bought a cold cap online. The prescription bottles on my counter were for medications that anyone could source if they looked hard enough. The weight loss was intentional, controlled, gradual, deliberate. She had researched everything. She had prepared for everything. For 14 months, she had looked me in the face and told me she was dying. For 14 months, I had cried for her, prayed for her, rearranged my entire life around her. For 14 months, my children had known their aunt was sick and had been scared, and had made her cards and said gentle little prayers before bed. I excused myself from Marcus's office. I went to the bathroom down the hall. I ran the water so no one would hear me. I gave myself 5 minutes. Then I washed my face, straightened my jacket, walked back in and asked him what else he had. There was more. Of course there was more. While the affair had been going on for approximately 9 months, the financial maneuvering had been happening even longer. Marcus had cross-referenced financial records with public filings and had discovered a series of transactions I had not been aware of. The investment property, the one Daniel and I had celebrated closing on 3 years ago. The one Lena had held a card for. It had been refinanced 7 months ago. Daniel had used it as collateral against a loan for an amount that represented nearly everything we had built into it. The loan had not gone into any account I had access to. I did not know about the refinance. My signature appeared on the paperwork. I had not signed those documents. I will say that again, because I need you to hear it. My signature appeared on documents I had not signed, which meant someone had either forged my signature or had placed documents in front of me labeled as something else. I thought about the stack of papers Daniel had asked me to sign the previous spring. Tax documents, he'd said. I had been nursing Caleb back from an ear infection. I had been exhausted. I had signed them in the kitchen doorway while Daniel held a pen and told me where each signature went. I had not read them. Why would I read them? They were tax documents. He was my husband. Marcus also found that Lena had, in the months before the diagnosis, quietly opened a joint account with Daniel at a bank neither of us had ever used. The money from the loan on the investment property had been moved there. Over 18 months, they had transferred just under $240,000. Our money that was meant to be our children's college funds. Money that was meant to be our safety net. Money that had taken us a decade to build. Gone. Into an account that had my husband's name and my sister's name on it. 2 people I had loved without conditions. 2 people who had looked at what I had built and decided they wanted it. I sat in Marcus's office for a long time after he finished. He offered me water. I drank it. Then I asked him for everything, every document, every photograph, every financial record, and I asked him for the name of the best family law attorney he had ever worked with. Because I was done grieving. I was ready to move. I want to tell you something about that moment. Because people always ask me, when I get to this part, whether I was angry. And the honest answer is yes. But the anger wasn't fire. It wasn't the hot, blinding kind that makes you do something stupid. It was cold, focused, quiet. The kind of anger that knows how to wait. And I was going to use every last degree of it. The attorney Marcus sent me to was a woman named Carol. She was 61 years old, had been practicing family law for 30 years, and had the kind of composed, almost clinical warmth that made you feel simultaneously safe and terrified on behalf of your opponent. I told her everything. I handed over Marcus's full report, the financial records, the photographs, the documents with my suspected forged signature. Carol listened without interrupting. She took notes in a small, neat hand. When I finished, she looked at me for a moment and then she said, "This is one of the more comprehensive cases of premeditated marital fraud I have seen in a long time." She said the forged signature alone could expose Daniel to criminal charges. She said the fraudulent transfer of marital assets gave me grounds for a claim well beyond a standard divorce settlement. She said the fabricated illness, while not in itself a criminal act, established a pattern of deliberate manipulation that a family court judge would view very seriously when determining custody arrangements. She told me what I needed to do first. I listened carefully. I went home and I did not change a single thing about how I behaved. I cooked dinner. I helped Mia with her reading. I kissed my husband goodnight. And for the next 3 weeks, while Carol and her team built the case, I lived inside the lie alongside them. That was the hardest part. Not the discovery. Not the legal process. Not what came later. It was those 3 weeks of ordinary evenings. Of Daniel turning to me in bed and saying goodnight in the voice I had loved for 10 years. Of Lena texting me to check in, using the same warm words she had always used, asking about the kids, asking if I needed anything. I answered her every time. Cheerfully. Warmly. Like nothing had changed. I am not a cruel person. But I am a strategic one. And I needed them comfortable. I needed them to believe they were still ahead of me. The day everything came apart was a Saturday in November. It was deliberately chosen. Carol had advised on the timing. Daniel was served with divorce papers at 9 in the morning. While he was making coffee in our kitchen, I had arranged for my mother to take the children to her house the night before. I did not want Mia and Caleb anywhere near what was about to happen. I was sitting at the kitchen table when the process server knocked. Daniel opened the door. He came back into the kitchen, holding the envelope with the expression of a man who was watching something he thought was far away, arriving much faster than expected. He said, "What is this?" Not a question. A statement. I said, "Sit down, Daniel." He didn't sit. He said, "Nadia, what is going on?" I said, "I know about the account at First Federal. I know about the investment property refinance. I know about the forged documents, and I know about Lena." He was quiet for a very long time. The coffee maker beeped behind him. He said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough." He said, it's not what you're making it into, the money we were going to tell you. We were trying to figure out how." I said, "You were trying to figure out how?" He said, "I know how this sounds. I said, Daniel, my signature is on documents I never signed. Do you understand what that means? Because my attorney does. That landed. I watched it land. His face changed, in a way I had never seen before. The careful, composed man I had been married to for 10 years looked suddenly very young and very frightened. He said, that wasn't supposed to. I didn't. Nadia, I need you to let me explain. I said, you can explain to Carol, she's expecting your call by Monday. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I said, I need you to be out of this house by tomorrow evening. The locks are being changed Monday morning. He said, you can't just. I said, the children are at my mother's. They'll come home when you're gone. That's what I'm asking of you. Don't make this harder than it already is for them. I walked past him. I got in my car. I drove to a coffee shop 2 miles away and sat there for 40 minutes with my hands wrapped around a mug until I stopped shaking. Then I called my mother and told her everything. My mother did not take it well. That is an understatement. I will not go into what my mother said because some of it is not fit to repeat, and also because I think it belongs only to her. What I will tell you is that she asked to be the one to call Lena. I let her. I had something else planned for Lena. 3 days after Daniel vacated the house, I drove to Lena's apartment. I had told her I was coming. I had told her only that I needed to talk to her about Daniel. She opened the door looking tired, composed, rehearsed. She had the expression of someone who has already decided what the conversation is going to be and has prepared their position. She said, come in. I'm so sorry. I know this must be so hard for you. I sat down across from her. I did not soften it. I did not lead up to it. I said, when were you diagnosed, Lena? She said, what? I said, you're stage 3 breast cancer, the diagnosis. When was it? Her face did something complicated. She said, you know when, I told you, I called you that mornings. I said, there's no oncologist on record. There are no treatment records. There is no cancer diagnosis anywhere. In your medical history, I've seen your records. She was quiet. I said, the wig, the prescription bottles, the cold cap, the weight loss, the appointments, all of it, the whole thing, none of it was real. She said, Nadia. I said, don't. She tried 3 different approaches in the next 10 minutes. First, she denied it. Then she cried. Then she tried to explain it as a kind of breakdown. A desperate bid for attention, something that had gotten out of hand. I let her talk. I let her say all of it. And then I said, I'm not here for an explanation. I'm here because I wanted to look at you when I told you that every document you and Daniel signed together has been reviewed by my attorney, that the police have been informed of the suspected signature forgery, and that I will be filing a civil suit against you personally for fraud. The crying stopped. She said, civil, you're going to sue me. I said, you helped drain my children's savings. Yes. I am going to sue you. She said, Nadia, we're family. And I looked at her, my sister, the woman who had stood beside me at my wedding, who had held both of my newborns, who had sat on my kitchen floor eating takeout and laughing at nothing at 2 in the morning. I looked at her and I said, I had a family, you decided what to do with that. I walked out. I did not look back. And that was only the beginning of what was coming for them. The divorce proceedings were not quick. They lasted 11 months. But Carol was extraordinary. The forged signature charge was the cornerstone. A handwriting analyst confirmed that my signature on the refinancing documents had been reproduced, almost perfectly. But not perfectly, using a technique that suggested Daniel had traced it from another document. The DA's office opened an investigation. Daniel's attorney advised him immediately to cooperate. In the end, he did not face criminal prosecution. He accepted a civil settlement that was, by any measure, comprehensive. The investment property was returned fully to my name. The $240,000 in the joint account was frozen pending judgment and ultimately awarded to me almost in full, minus legal fees. Custody was structured with primary residential custody to me with visitation for Daniel on a standard schedule. That was later modified after he relocated. The civil suit against Lena took longer. 18 months. She had no significant assets, which complicated recovery. But the judgment was entered in my favor. She could not escape the record. She could not pretend, in any future legal or financial context, that this had not happened. There are people who asked me if it was worth it. The time. The cost. The exposure. I want to be very clear about my answer. Yes. Every single day of it. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because my children deserved to know that their mother fought for them, and because I needed to know it too. The first morning I woke up in my house alone, the children asleep down the hall, the other side of the bed cold and smooth, I lay there and I waited for it to feel like loss. Because that is what I had expected. That the end of it would feel like emptiness. Like standing in a room after the furniture has been taken. But it didn't. It felt like air. Like the first full breath I'd taken in 2 years. I'm not going to tell you the recovery was easy. It wasn't. There were mornings in the first 6 months that were very dark. Mornings where Mia would ask about her Aunt Lena and I would have to find words that were honest but not cruel, age-appropriate. But not a lie, and I would stand at the kitchen counter after she left for school and feel the full weight of what had been taken from her. From both of them. The children who had made cards for their sick aunt. The children who had said prayers for her. They were robbed too. Not of money. Of trust. Of the uncomplicated belief that family is safe. And that is something I carry. I carry it differently now. But I carry it. My mother went through her own grieving process. She had loved Lena ferociously, the way mothers love the child. They always felt needed protecting most. And finding out that that child had used her family's love as a weapon, that it had all been performance, did something to my mother that I don't think she has fully come back from. She speaks to Lena sometimes. On birthdays. Briefly. She told me once, I don't know who she is now, I'm not sure I ever did. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just held her hand. Daniel moved to another city about 4 months after the divorce was finalized. The children see him on school breaks and some holidays. He is not a bad father in the practical sense. He shows up. He calls. He is present in the ways that are visible and checkable. Whether he is present in the deeper, less visible ways, I genuinely don't know. That is between him and them. I made a decision very early in this process that I would not use my children as a way to punish him. Not because he didn't deserve punishment. He did. But they didn't deserve to become instruments of it. So I kept that line. I kept it even on the nights when it cost me something to keep it. And I'm proud of that. As for Lena, I have not spoken to her since the day I walked out of her apartment. That was 2 years and 4 months ago. She sent me a letter once. It was 3 pages long. It explained everything: her loneliness, her feeling that life had passed her by, her love for Daniel that had crept up on her before she could stop it, her shame about the illness lie that had started small and become something she couldn't control. She wanted me to know she was in therapy. She wanted me to know she had changed. She wanted me to know she loved me. I read all 3 pages. I thought about each sentence. Then I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and put the envelope in a drawer. I have not responded. I don't know if I will. I want to be honest with you about that. Because there is a version of this story where the ending is clean and resolved, and I can tell you that forgiveness completed something in me. But I am not there yet. I am not sure I want to be. What I know is this: the person who faked a terminal illness to position herself inside my marriage did not do it impulsively. She did not do it out of a moment of weakness. She did it with planning and patience and sustained deliberate deception over more than a year. She looked at my children and made a calculation. And I have not yet found a version of forgiveness that accounts for that. Maybe I will someday. Maybe I won't. But I have stopped waiting for clarity on that question. Before I let myself be okay, I want to tell you the things I actually learned. Not the clean lessons. The real ones. The first is that love is not the same as safety. We grow up believing that the people who love us are safe. That love is a kind of protection. But love is just a feeling. And feelings can coexist with calculation. They can coexist with greed. They can coexist with cruelty. Lena may have loved me in some real and genuine way. I actually believe she did. And she still did what she did. Those 2 things are both true. The second thing I learned is that the version of yourself that you build when everything is falling apart is the one you get to keep. I became someone different during those 11 months of legal proceedings. Not harder. More honest. With myself, with my children, with the people I chose to let in. I stopped performing ease. I stopped pretending that things were fine when they weren't. I started saying what I needed. I started letting people sit with me in the difficult parts, instead of managing the difficult parts alone, so that no one felt burdened by me. That version of me, the one who was cracked open and had to figure out what she was made of, I would not trade her for anything. The third thing, and this one is the one I come back to most. Trust your body. That shadow on Daniel's face at dinner. The conversation about savings accounts. The slight shift in how Lena held herself when she walked through my door. My body knew. It knew before my mind was ready to know. And I had filed it all away and not opened the file because I was afraid of what was in it. I will not do that again. Not for anyone. Mia is 11 now. She is funny and fierce, and occasionally terrifying in the way that daughters become when they are figuring out who they are. She asked me recently, during a long drive, whether I was sad that our family wasn't together anymore. I thought carefully before I answered. I said, I'm sad that some people made choices that changed things for us, but I'm not sad about who we are now. I think we're better now. I think we know what we're made of. She thought about that for a while. Then she said, "I think we're pretty strong." I said, "Yeah, I think so too." She went back to her music. I drove for about a mile before I started crying quietly. Enough that she didn't notice. Good crying. The kind that happens when something enormous is also. Exactly right. Caleb is 9. He is gentle and observant and asks more questions than most adults I know. He has not asked about Lena specifically yet. When he does, I will be honest with him. I will tell him that sometimes people we love let us down. In very serious ways. I will tell him that it is okay to be sad about that. And I will tell him that what happened to us does not define what love can be. It only shows us one way it can fail. I don't know what Lena's life looks like now. I have heard things through extended family, through the small inevitable news that moves through people who once shared a world. I have not looked for more than that. I have not needed to. What I do know is this. She built a plan that required my love for her to function. She needed me to believe in her completely. And the thing about that, the thing I think about sometimes, in the quiet, is that she was right that I loved her that much. She just didn't count on what I was willing to do when that love was finished. She thought my loyalty would protect her. It didn't. She thought my trust in family would make me easy to manage. It didn't. She thought I would be too heartbroken to think clearly. I was heartbroken. I thought very clearly anyway. If you are listening to this and something in it sounds familiar, if you have that file in your mind that you haven't opened yet because you're afraid of what's inside, I want to tell you something. Open it. Whatever is in there, you can survive it. I know that is easy to say and hard to believe. But it is true. You are stronger than the version of yourself that is being managed and handled by someone who counts on your love to keep you compliant. I know because I was that version of myself. And she is still here. She just doesn't wait for apologies anymore. The letter is still in the drawer. I don't know if it will ever come out. Maybe that is the part of this story that doesn't resolve. Maybe that's okay. Some things don't close cleanly. Some losses stay open just enough to remind you they were real. But I wake up in my house, every morning, with my children down the hall. And that is enough. That is everything.